Hi, I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. This is a battle that had to happen, and I don't know what took so long. Today, it's the Tudor Heritage Black Bay Chronograph versus the Omega Seamaster Professional Diver 300-meter Chronograph. Let the games begin. Alright, I'm going to go with the Tudor first because we know the S&P 300 quite well. The Tudor only bowed in 2017. It feels like it's been with us forever, but maybe that's just because the Black Bay has been so prominent in Tudor's lineup for so many years. This specific model is still fairly novel. It is a large watch, though not an oversized watch. Despite establishing the 43mm case in the Black Bay Bronze back in 2016, Tudor decided to use a 41 for the Black Bay Chrono. The watch is easy to wear and it wears true to its size. It's 41 and it wears like a 41. Lug to lug, the pivoted end links mean the case is the measurement. 50.3mm lug to lug across the wrist. Let's give ourselves a bit less light. I actually feel like we're washing out the watch here. And you can see the timepiece is fairly thick, as it's 15mm thick. Nevertheless, in a matchup with the Omega, this is actually the slimmer of the two watches. The spacing between the lugs is not vintage, though the remainder of the watch is vintage inspired. 22mm means this watch has a planted, broad, and modern stance on the wrist. It's a good looking watch, and you can see in proportion, it fills up my 16cm circumference wrist without overwhelming it. I recommend it for wrists as small as 14cm circumference. The bracelet is an interesting piece because it continues a trend that started in 2016 with Tudor reintroducing the rivet look without the rivet construction of 1950s and 60s Tudor and Rolex rivet bracelets. So this is a conventionally constructed bracelet, but it looks like the vintage pieces. It is sized using screws, so make no mistake, no pin sleeves, but neither are there rivets. You can see plenty of ventilation on the underside. There are nice gaps to avoid pinching skin, pulling hair. All satin on the top, polished on the sides. You have a clamshell, and the clamshell locks the system in place, but there's a lot going on here. There are spring-loaded pin snaps in ceramic inside to hold the swing arm in place, and then externally to hold the clamshell in place. The ceramic pin snaps ensure that the tolerances will remain over time, as the metal cannot aggress against these surfaces and wear them down. That said, you don't have quite the degree of adjustment for dives that you'll find on the Omega, but this is not a dive watch. You have 3 anchoring points, and you can change the anchoring point of the bracelet using the strap tool. This is a Black Bay, make no mistake, but with that particular bezel, this is more of a quasi-motorsports Tudor than a diving Tudor, especially considering the calibration and the speeds involved. Units starting in 500 and ending in 60. This is a watch used for gauging the speed of things moving quickly. This is one not so much for Daytona Beach as Daytona Speedway. Now, it is a quasi-Daytona diver, which means it's somewhere between a Tudor Black Bay dive watch and a vintage Tudor chronograph or Rolex Daytona. The case itself is simple and strong. There are simulated bevels to remind us that back in the day, Tudor and Rolex cases were actually made in the same place and beautifully beveled on their flanks. Contrast between satin and polish, you've got that tack, you've got a matte black dial, twin register design distinct from the Omega, but you've got the date and applique indices, a little bit of a vintage nod to the snowflakes of the late 60s and early to mid 1970s. Again, that is a Tudor Submariner nod, so there are quite a few cues going on here, including the quirky use of the original Tudor Rose logo on the crown and the post-1968 Tudor Shield logo on the dial. But it's an easy watch to read, it's plenty loomed, and inside it's actually a Breitling B01 caliber with a 70-hour power reserve, vertical clutch and column wheel chronograph actuation, 28.8 beat rate, and COSC chronometer certifications with stop seconds and a quick set date. 200 meters water resistant thanks to its screw downs, and these are true screw downs. Jump into the Omega. You can see the Omega is a special piece, partly because this design's been with us for so long and it's worn so well. Now, the interesting thing is that when this design was first introduced in 1993, you could still buy an original Tudor Submariner. So this quarter-century design has some legs in it, and you can see why. It fits easily on my 16cm circumference wrist. It is thicker, no doubt, 16.8mm thick, but the 41.5mm case is no broader on the wrist than the Tudor. The only place where it really stretches its legs is the solid end link span, so link to link across the wrist. It's 53.7 versus 50.3 across the wrist for the Tudor. If you're just including the case and you plan to put this on a strap, it's going to be 49mm lug to lug. The bracelet is substantial, and like the original from the 1990s, it's a little bit of a hybrid of a dress and a sports bracelet with small links, staggered alignment, differential finish, but it is squared off on its side for a sportier look than the rounded off 90s versions. It's also sized using screws rather than pin sleeves, so it is more substantial and upscale than the 90s versions. The clasp is also more substantial than what you will get on the Tudor, as it features a twin trigger release system, and it's milled out from the solid. Internally, there's a fold-out dive extension that gives you a good deal more adjustability. It's all or nothing, but it's wonderful for use over a dive suit or a thick winter coat for landlubbers like myself. Helium escape valve for saturation divers. This one water resistant to 300 meters, and you can see the details of the case, the polish, the satin, the bevels, the sheer, and one deceptive styling feature. These are shouldered and bolstered chronograph pushers. They are not screw down. The watch is 300 meters without screw downs, and these are always accessible for actuation. Now the dial is gloss with applique, contrasting with the matte applique tandem of the Tudor, and you can see there is also a little bit of a tone-on-tone contrast between the anthracite registers and the gloss black of the dial. Appreciate the fact that there are polished chapter rings for each of the triple registers. This is a chronograph with an hours register. And as you can see, the Tudor chronograph featuring only a 45-minute register, unusual. This one features a 30-minute register, but again, it keeps going beyond 30 minutes, right up to 12 hours. So there's a bit more functionality. You can see the iconic skeleton-style bond hands. And of course, this being a true diver, it has unidirectional rotating bezel. It's crisp, it's sharp, and it's one of the best I've experienced on a Diver 300. It features a ceramic inlay that is robustly scratch resistant, just like a sapphire. And then if you do want to time something that's greater than 30 minutes but less than 60, you can use the diving bezel. Inside caliber 3330, it's based on a 7753 Valjoux, but heavily hot rodded. It's gained a 52-hour power reserve, a free sprung balance. It's gained a coaxial escapement, a chronometer certification, very precise, very tough, highly upgraded. It does not feature a conventional quickset. That is actually shrouded and coaxial with the helium escape valve. So a little bit of an unusual feature. Another hot rod enhancement of this basic movement is the fact that it's been upgraded from a cam system on the standard Valjoux 7753 to a column wheel. Nevertheless, it does continue to use a lateral clutch. So there's a little bit of jump in the actuation of the chronograph, but not much. You can barely see it. A testament to the might of Omega and ETA in the year 2019. Now, let's review the inventory of advantages for each of these watches, starting with the Tudor Heritage Black Bay Chronograph. Okay, first, let's talk about price. If you were to buy these two watches new, this watch would cost about $950 less. So if you're going to buy new, this watch does have an advantage on that basis. It costs almost $1,000 or $1,000 US less money. I'm also going to mention that this watch features a true quickset, not a system a la the Omega that requires a pusher adjuster to cycle the date. So true quickset advantage Tudor. I'm also going to shout out the Breitling B01 caliber, which features a 70-hour power reserve versus 52 for the Omega, so advantage Tudor. And granted, we're not talking thin watches in either case, but one watch is 15 millimeters thick, the other is almost 17 millimeters. Advantage Tudor. You can see the difference right there. Advantage Tudor. This watch is a better fit on a smaller wrist. Is your wrist under 14.5 centimeters circumference? This is going to be the choice. It's shorter lug to lug, and the pivoted end links of the bracelet mean you can pull it straighter down around the tight curve of a smaller wrist. I'm also going to mention that it's important to note that lume and legibility on this watch are better. I'm also going to postulate that perhaps even in the day, due to the skeleton profile hands on the Omega, it's a little bit easier to read the Tudor. So as a watch that, you watch, it's easier to watch. Finally, let's talk about the twin register dial and the cleanliness and the balance that brings to the table. It's less cluttered, it's more elegant, and I believe with less crowding comes more beauty. Now let's talk about the advantages of the Omega. The Omega, first and foremost, it has a big warranty advantage. Tudor, 2 years. Omega, 5 years. Omega is playing in Rolex territory with that half-decade warranty. Tudor really needs to step up. I'll also mention that the clasp extension, the quality of the bracelet in terms of the solidity in the hand and on the wrist, the quality, the solidity, the feel of the clasp, all of this is superior on the Omega. But not only does it feel superior, it also has A no tool required full dive extension, which is again a wonderful thing if you're just wearing a thick coat and you want to wear your watch on the outside for outdoor work or activity. Advantage Omega, better bracelet, better clasp, better extension system. 300 meters with a helium escape valve. It's both more water resistant and set up for seriously pro duties, the likes of which you and I may never encounter, but it's nice to know. Luxury, after all, is about getting more than you need, and it's a wonderful conversation piece. Let's talk about the no screw down chronograph pushers. You can actuate this chronograph whenever you want. If something comes up on the spur of the moment requiring a stopwatch, you're ready immediately. No threading out the crown. This watch actually works better as a trackside motorsports timer than the somewhat more cumbersome screw down crown on the Tudor. Now let's talk about pre-owned value. This is a watch that typically sells at about $3,250 pre-owned versus typically about $3,750 pre-owned for the Tudor. If you're buying one of these watches used, this typically costs a little bit less money, so about half a grand, and if you buy one of recent production, it's going to have more warranty than even a new Tudor Heritage Black Bay chronograph. Let's talk a little bit about the no fake rivet profile of the bracelet. Sometimes it's good to be comfortable with what you are and who you are and not pretend to be a retro re-edition or to cop a look that isn't true to the design and engineering of the watch. I don't love the simulated rivets. You might, but I consider this, or the lack thereof, to be an advantage of the Omega. Finally, enduring design. I don't think the Black Bay knows what it wants to be. Is it a Daytona? Is it a Tudor Chrono? Is it a Black Bay Diver? Is it a Snowflake? Is it a pre-Snowflake no-guard Tudor Submariner? I see about 4 or 5 different Rolex and Tudor watches from 2 or 3 different eras here, and I'm not sure the pastiche of all 5 is going to be as timeless as this design, made famous on the wrist of 007, sure, but product placement aside, remarkably enduring, recognizable, and beloved. There's no planned obsolescence here. This watch looks like a Diver 300 chronograph from 1993, so the legs and longevity of this look appeal to me, but objectively, they've simply outlasted any comparable Tudor design. This is the watch for me. Of the two, I can say that this is the one that impresses me more, right down to the anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. It's not quite on par in every respect with the Tudor, but it does have the coaxial escapement. It does have the silicone hairspring. It's based on an ancient architecture that's indestructible, and I'm not sure I'd put the B01 quite on par. I love the design of this watch. I own it as a 3-hand diver. I love the fact that it feels more substantial on the wrist and in the hand. I love the fact that counterintuitively, this winds up being the better motorsports chronograph with the no screw down pushers. It's simply easier to actuate, and there are fun stories to tell between the tale behind the saturation diving appendage of the helium escape valve, James Bond, playing James Bond and GoldenEye for N64, or simply my own personal history wearing this watch through college and my Navy years, including my second class swim. Maybe I've got reverse baggage whereby I think of this watch nostalgically, and perhaps this watch has no associations, but for tangible and intangible reasons, this is going to be my choice. You guys let me know in the box below which of these you would make your watch. Okay, Tudor Heritage Black Bay Chrono, Omega Diver 300 meter Chrono. A few things to note. The Tudor is simply easier to see, but there is more lume on the Omega. As you can see, the rotating bezel is the same color as the minutes hand, so there's a little differential lume going on there. Also note that all of the chronograph functions and the seconds are fully lumed, whereas the Tudor does not lume any of the chronograph functions or the seconds hand. I'm still giving it to the Tudor because the Tudor is more legible.